Good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock. Thanks for joining the Blue Card Awareness. As many of you are aware that over the next 4 weeks, we'll have 30 Blue Card ICs trained. And the purpose of this is to give you familiarity in the next couple weeks when you start hearing some different terminology on the radio and on the scene. So tonight we have our Blue Card trainer that'll be training most of us that are going through the course. His name is Dan Daw. He's retired captain from West Bloomfield. With that, if just for those on Zoom, if you can do us a favor and keep your microphones muted. There's supposed to be about 60 on. I think we're running around 40 right now. So if you have some questions, the chat down at the bottom is the best way to do that with this bigger group. But other than that, I'll give it over to Dan.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for taking some time out of your Sunday night and joining us for this. I'm going to try and make this quick and painless. It can be a lot of fun. Some of the hands-on stuff we would normally do, we're obviously not going to be able to do doing it this route. But those of you that are actually going to be going through the Blue Card certification program, you actually get to do quite a bit of this. So a little bit more about myself. I was active in the fire service for 35 years. I started out right out of high school, joined a small department where I grew up, became a volunteer. Back then they didn't have the term paid on call, so it gives you an idea of how old I actually am. And did that up until I became a career firefighter in West Bloomfield, working my way up through the ranks, retiring as a command officer and becoming a Blue Card instructor. To give you a little bit of background behind Blue Card. So our department brought this, a member of our department brought this into us and wanted us to try it out. So the training officer asked the three of us command officers to go through the class. And my first thought was, why do we need another command class? I've been through Fire Ground Command, I've been through ICS, and been through NIMS. Why do I need something different? Actually going through the class, I actually found that it was intriguing. I think that's the best word for it. Actually sitting through the simulation lab, I thought this is something worth giving it a try. And commanding my first fire with Blue Card, I realized this is fantastic. It's not just a command class, it is also a communication class. One of the biggest things we cite in NIOSH reports for problems, line of duty deaths, is poor or lack of communication. And this really helps with accountability. It helps keeps firefighters safer, keeps the radio clear, and command actually controls the radio. And it just tends to make everything a little bit better. Normally I'd be asking everybody how long you've been in the fire service, but I don't think I'll do that tonight. That's a little bit more time than what we need. But with that, we'll go ahead and I'll bring up the PowerPoint and we'll get started. All right, Blue Card, the Hazard Zone Management System. So what we're going to go over tonight is just an awareness portion. So it'll make it short and easy. We won't go into great depth, but what we want you to understand is how the system works. Understand the language, so when you're hearing these things, you know what it is to expect. You know what the people are saying when they're using the language. So one of the things that we like to talk about with the Blue Card is if you have standard conditions and you apply standard actions, we should be able to expect a standard outcome. So one of the things I'll talk about is something called recognition prime decision making. For those that have not heard of that, think of it this way. In your mind, you have a large slide carousel. For those who are a bit younger and don't know what a slide carousel is, think of the photo gallery on your smartphone. When you pull up in front of that standard condition, your mind immediately goes through that carousel or that photo gallery and looks for that picture or a picture that matches it in your memory. It then opens up a file and you apply those standard actions. So these are the things that worked for me the last time. They should work for me again this time. And then we can expect that standard outcome. That's kind of how our brains work. It is physically impossible for any of us to come up with a new strategy for something we've never seen before. So our brains actually work in this way. And we kind of figure that if we take those standard conditions and apply those same actions that worked the last time, we should be able to expect the standard outcome. So to go back a little bit, Incident Command actually began in California. It was the California Department of Forestry Fire Service Division that developed the first Incident Command system. And they did it to deal with the wildfires that they deal with out there in California, and they called it FireScope. There was a young chief from the West at the time that saw it and said, hey, this is something that I think we can apply to structural firefighting. It'll help us keep our folks safer, give us some structure to what we do when we deploy our people. And Alan Brunacini called it Fire Ground Command. So anybody that's ever read the Fire Ground Command book, whether for a class or for a promotion or for any other reason, you're going to recognize a lot of this, because this is where this actually began and how it was developed. Anybody who's been to FDIC in years past has seen the East versus West and knows that the East does not want to adopt anything that the West has come up with because they like things done their way. Their attitude is, why are we adopting something those young punks out West came up with when we've been around forever? And so they developed the Incident Command System. Then the federal government got involved and we renamed it NIMS. And they added a few more little things into it. And it's all basically the same thing. Unfortunately, in 2002, Phoenix suffered the loss of one of their firefighters. They realized they were doing some things wrong, realized they were handling things not in a right way. They were looking at things from the ICS perspective, the Fire Ground Command perspective, and those are command programs that are designed for type 1 and 2 incidents. The big things, the natural and man-made disaster type incidents. We don't typically go on that. 99% of what we respond to are type 4 and 5 incidents. So the department went through a huge training process and came up with what we now know as Blue Card. It's a command system it's the beginning of the command system, and it easily expands into ICS, NIMS, Fire Ground Command, whatever version you want to call it. It easily grows into that. So going back to Fire Ground Command, we have 8 functions of command. Deployment, obviously, we have to get there. Once we get there, we have function 2, assume, confirm, and position. Situation evaluation is function 3. Function 4 is strategy and incident action planning. Function 5 is communications. So for those of you that are going through this or have already gone through the online portion, you'll remember that function 5 is the longest of the functions. Matter of fact, on day 1, when we go over all of this, we put that to the end of the day because it is such a long section. Function 6 is organization. 7 is review, evaluate, and revise. Some people call that a critique or a after action report. And then function 8 is continue support. And eventually we do get to terminate command if everything goes right. So obviously deployment is the first thing that we have to do. And when we deploy, the whole goal is to provide and manage resources. Sometimes those resources can be equipment. Sometimes those resources can be people. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. You'll hear us say periodically, call early, call often. Most of us are having a difficult time maintaining some type of adequate staffing. Many of us do not have the luxury of having as many people as we want because it's simply prevented, or it's just not possible to get that many people. So a lot of us have gone to mutual aid. So West Bloomfield is in Oakland County. I actually live in Livingston County, and several of the instructors that I use are Livingston County chiefs. And out here, they pretty much do automatic mutual aid, and it's not uncommon for one of their chiefs to show up to a different department and actually run their incident for them because they were an early arriving chief. Don't be afraid to call for help. It's a whole lot better to have help coming to your incident before you need them than waiting until after you need them to call them. Response times, we know how long it takes your own department to get there. Think about how much longer it's going to take the neighboring department to get there. And chances are they're not just going to be sitting in a station waiting for you to call. They're going to be out on their own call. So it may take even longer for somebody to get there. So like we said, call early, call often. Don't, certainly don't cry wolf, but don't be afraid to call for mutual aid. It was one of the problems that in West Bloomfield, we were a little proud early on, and we didn't want to call for mutual aid, but we learned that really it's not such a bad thing. Everybody likes to come and play. And worst case scenario, if you actually don't need them, that's why they put that great big wheel in the front of the fire truck is so you can turn it around. So when we call people, we have two basic statuses for everybody that's responding to the scene. Either you are assigned to something or you're unassigned. So unassigned means you're on the way, means you're staged. You could be out rehabbing. You could be in the process of what we call recycling. And we'll talk a little bit more about recycling later. If you're assigned, you obviously have, it's pretty simple. You've got something to do. You'll notice on there's a piece called on deck. And on deck is something we'll get into a little bit later, but it's a concept. Think about it in the way we think about on deck for baseball. And right now, I'll just leave it at that. SDG is sector, division, or group. In the blue card system, we use sectors, divisions. Divisions, as you may recall from ICS, is a geographical location. Sectors is also something similar. Groups are somebody that has a specific task, but they're not assigned to any place in particular. They're allowed to freely roam, if you will, and go where they want. So in the blue card system, we do not use groups, because if my folks are just wandering around taking care of whatever their assignment is, I actually don't know where they're at, and I can't account for them. Accountability, you'll find in blue card, is extremely, extremely important. This program was designed to keep people safe. One of the things that I will ask quite a bit during the certification program, I will ask folks what the number one job of any fire department officer is. I don't care what the rank, from sergeant to lieutenant to captain to chief of the department. The number one job of any fire department officer, it's firefighter safety. And our job and our number one responsibility is to make sure our folks go home to their families at the end of their shift or at the end of the incident, whatever that may be. So we don't like groups because they don't give us the accountability we want. And if we can't have that accountability, it's impossible for us to keep those people safe. So the foundation of any incident management system is staging. In West Bloomfield, through most of my career, we used to have everybody would arrive on scene, and if you weren't given a task right out of the gate, you ended up standing in the front yard. And we used to refer to that as staging in the front yard. It's not very effective. Quite often we walk up and walk up to that little group and say, I need 2 people, I need 4 people, who's ready? And none of them are ready because they're all standing around just kind of waiting to see what happens next, to see who's going to be assigned. Also, a little too often, we would end up mixing crews by doing that. And again, that is something that hurts our accountability, makes it that much more difficult to keep people safe. So we came up through Blue Card, they came up with 2 different types of staging. We have level 1 staging and we have level 2 staging. The way level 1 staging works is as soon as the first arriving unit calls on scene, everybody else goes to level 1. So what is level 1? Level 1 is stopping a block or so away in your direction of travel and not passing your last tactical option. So Blue Card is adaptable. It's not this, we're not turning anybody into Phoenix Fire Department. Quite honestly, there's no way any of our fire departments can respond with the number of people they respond with. We don't expect you to do everything as it's taught in the program. We want you to localize it, adapt it, make it work for you. In this particular case, what we're talking about is that first company that arrives on scene, they give their initial radio report. Everybody else, with the exception of the second due incident commander, which would be typically your first due chief officer, everybody else stages level 1. They stop at the last point that they can turn away. They stop at the last hydrant. They stop at the last water source if you're doing tanker operations, or that's what your locale requires. And the reason for that is, and I'm sure most of you have seen this, you pull up on the scene and everybody else just joins you there. You've now blocked off the entire road. You've got pumpers all lined up. You couldn't get an aerial in if you wanted it to. And tankers, yeah, forget it. They're not getting close. By stopping that block away, your foot's still on the brake. You haven't put it in park. You're not just sitting there. It gives the incident commander time to think through what his initial action plan is and figure out if he wants you to come in from a different direction. He wants you to tag a hydrant. He wants you to set up a water supply from that pond that you just drove by. Gives him a chance to think, gives him a chance to catch his or her breath. And so everybody goes into level 1 staging. We don't end up with a pile of trucks and a pile of people in the front yard. And it makes it easier for that first arriving officer to make their decisions. Level 2 staging is what we are all familiar with when we talk about staging, where you find a parking lot, usually close to the donut shop or something like that, maybe the pizza place if it's at night. Someplace where you can put a lot of apparatus and a lot of people. It's usually given its own radio channel. The first arriving officer usually is in charge. That does not mean that they have to stay that way. They can always pass that off to somebody else so they don't have to sit there. But it's a location someplace away, usually a couple, 3 blocks away, big parking lot, someplace where you can maneuver the apparatus and then pull out the apparatus and or the personnel you need. And like I said, that's typically for larger incidents, someplace where you're going to need something beyond what you typically send as your first due response. So function 2, we assume, confirm, and position command. Look, the biggest thing, again, to make people safe, to take care of each other, the biggest thing we need to do is put somebody in charge. So we need to quickly establish an IC, and there can be only one incident commander. I think everybody knows that. That's kind of been beaten into us over the last few years with the initiation of ICS. And it makes sense. Only one person in charge, but we need to make sure that we establish that, make sure that everybody knows that there's somebody in charge. So we have several different types of command modes. IC number 1 here, this is 100% of the time, this is what we do. You have somebody shows up on the scene, an officer, somebody that's a senior person, they take charge and start making the initial decisions. About 15 to 20% of the time, we actually put the IC. It's a second person in, a battalion chief, a battalion captain, some type of command officer. They come in and sit in their command vehicle, preferably stay in their command vehicle, and they take command from outside where they have the best vantage point. IC number 1 on the incident that they're showing here, typically IC number 1's going to work him or herself. They're inside with their crew to make sure that their crew's safe. IC number 2 is in a place where they're by themselves. They're not distracted. Hopefully they have somebody or can grab somebody to help them monitor the radios and help them take notes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it's someplace where it's nice and concealed. The problem with this little slide here is typically that IC would not be leaning out the window talking to somebody unless it was the first arriving officer and they're doing a face-to-face discussion or command transfer. And then on those rare occasions, IC number 2 is upgraded into the incident management team, and they get in the bus, they get in the large command vehicle. I'm not sure what you have up there if you've got the county has something like this. And West Bloomfield, we would pull for the county. We'd ask Oakland County to bring something down for us to use. Thankfully, we only had to do that once. We've only burned down one senior home, and we haven't had to use it for anything else. So here's some of the advantages and disadvantages for that initial arriving IC. Obviously, because they're a company officer typically, or somebody who's acting in that capacity, they have the best ability to take care of their crew because they know exactly who they've got, who's with them. Once they move inside with their crew, they actually now have inside eyes, so you actually see what's going on inside. You're not relying on somebody else to paint that picture for you. You're actually there. Usually, it gets the problem solved rather quickly. The downside is you're trying to put somebody to work at the same time that they're trying to run the incident. One of the things that one of our young instructors has talked about, the first time he put this into use, he said the radio communications were terrible because he couldn't hear half of the crews arriving on scene. But he wanted to be inside with his crew to make sure they were safe, and so he could paint that better picture once it was time to transfer command. Obviously, it's a limited field division, and it greatly reduces your ability to handle a large span of control. Talking about span of control, everybody remembers from their ICS training, span of control is 3 to 7, optimal being 5. Never quite understood that. I don't know why it's 5. To me, optimal would kind of be 3, but they say it's 5. But the point is, it's hard to control more than 7 units at one time. Little story that I typically tell is, or the question I typically ask, does anybody know why phone numbers were originally limited to 7 digits? The answer is because somebody else who's a whole lot smarter than me determined that that's all we can remember is 7 things at a time. So that's why 7 is that magic number for the top, or the largest span of control that we can actually handle. So IC number 2, the advantages here are great. That person's stationary. They're in a single spot. They're not in the center of the firefight, so they can actually hear what's going on. They should have better communication capabilities. They have at least 2 radios. They have 1 portable and 1 mobile radio from the vehicle. Hopefully they actually have a 3rd. They have a better place where they can write things down, record everything. And nowadays they have access to better intelligence. They have computers, they have all kinds of other wonderful electronics that they can use to make their job easier and give them a much better opportunity to protect the folks that are inside. They now can sit outside and look at the big picture. They can tell what's going on the inside based on the changes they're seeing. And they can now ask somebody that's inside to give them the intel that they need while they still look at that big picture. So some of the disadvantages, your view of the hazard area might be poor. As an example, I pulled into a working garage fire, backed into a nice little driveway across the street, had a beautiful view of what was going on. And then the tanker pulled right in front of me and stopped. And all I saw was a great big red tanker in front of me, and I could no longer see the incident. So that can sometimes be a problem because you can't get in close enough to see what's going on. I disagree with the very hard to manage more than 1 radio channel. Like I said, if you have more than 1 radio, it makes it pretty simple because you can switch to the different channels on different radios. In West Bloomfield, as soon as you responded to a fire, you were switched to a tactical channel and came off the main radio frequency. And the reason for that is because who has the strongest radio on the fire ground? It's always dispatch. And if you're on a true duplex system, when you're talking, they can still talk over you. and they don't realize it because they can hear you talking still and don't realize that they're actually talking over you. And quite often they'd be dispatching a second call while you're trying to communicate with your crews inside. And as I said, they don't realize that they're doing that. So we always switch channels. They didn't like it because now they've got to monitor more than one, and they were short staffed as we were, but it made our guys safer because now we can actually talk to one another. The other nice thing is to being able to bring in a support officer, chief's aide. In the blue card world, we call them a FIT, which stands for Field Incident Technician. Preferably somebody that has similar training to the incident commander as far as how blue card works or how your tactics and strategy work, how your department's SOGs and SOPs work. Gives them an opportunity to understand so that if you miss something as the IC, he or she can look at you and say, hey, did you catch this? Did you catch that radio communication? Have we taken care of the utilities? All the little things that need to be done, they can help you with that. And it's kind of nice if you can grab somebody. Again, I realize we're all short staffed, but this is one of the nice things if you have like an auto aid, grab somebody from another department and bring them in your vehicle with you. People do want to keep banging on your door, and it can be anywhere from other firefighters to the media to the neighbors to all kinds of stuff. One of the neat little tricks that Nick Brunacini taught us was the IC roll up their window, keep it all the way up. The other person roll their window down a little bit. And that way, if somebody comes and knocks on the IC's window, they just point to the open window. And most people actually get that. They'll say, oh, hey, the window's open. Let's go ahead and go around that side because they must want to talk to us. So it gets them out of the IC's hair. Another good reason to have that support officer or the FIT, because that way you have somebody that can deal with these folks. Situation evaluation. Most of the time or throughout our careers, most of us have referred to this as size up. Size up, when does it begin? It begins right from the second we get the call. Size up actually can begin before that. It can, it's the daily staffing is a size up of sorts. Size up begins early on and it continues throughout the entire event. We're going to take some of that standard information that we typically get and we're going to use it to, along with our critical incident factors, to determine what our incident action plan should be. What do we want to do next? What resources are we going to need? Where is this incident going? We have to identify a strategy and develop an incident action plan. So the best thing here is to use a systematic method to make basic strategy decisions. So for those of you that have had some time in NIMS and done NIMS 300, 400, first, I'd like to offer my condolences. That's 4 days of your life you'll never get back. However, that said, they did teach us about the planning P. And essentially what we're going to do is a small version of that to help develop our basic strategy and determine what we need to do. So let's talk about the risk management. I really like these, the way that Alan Brunacini put this. We risk a lot to save savable lives. I mean, that's what we're here for. That's what we do. We want to make sure that we're going to save whoever we can. Ultimately, we are the ones that make the decision whether or not the building's empty. There's a story I tell when I teach this class about the family who had a fire in the middle of the night. When the fire department gets there, dad's out in the driveway, says everybody's out of the house. The wife and kids are in the car. The oldest child is at a friend's house, and we've got the pets. Everybody's out. Just please, try to save the house if you can. But the fire is out, so we've got no people to worry about. At the end of the fire, they found a body in the basement. As it turns out, the person that was spending the night at the friend's house, the child spending the night at the friend's house, ended up getting in a fight and came home in the middle of the night. and nobody knew it. So we're the ones who make that decision. So when we talk about risking a lot to save savable lives, we're the ones that have to decide whether or not there's anybody inside there to go save. The other end of that spectrum, we'll risk nothing to save nothing. We will not risk our lives at all for what is already lost, and that's either people or property. We'll show some slides later in this PowerPoint. We'll talk about the fire conditions. And the question I'm going to leave with you is, can somebody survive in that building? Are those conditions survivable? If they're not, why are we sending somebody in to go save them? Because there's nothing to save. Yeah, it would be great to bring out the body for the loved ones, but that's all it is a body at this point. Why am I putting my people at risk to save something that is already not savable? It's one of those things that we have to think about. If we know that there's no life safety issue within the building, or that it's too far gone, that nothing we can do will save them, we become the life safety risk. And again, we have to make sure our people go home. My favorite in this decision-making process is we will risk our lives a little in a highly calculated manner to save savable property. These are the times where we know everybody's out of the house. We know everything's good, but we're still going to put our lives at risk, go into that burning building, and we're going to save savable property. Think about it this way. So myself and any one of you people out there, so two of us, can go to any fire, any structure fire, I don't care how big, and we can put that fire out. Because at some point, that fire will burn down to a size that the two of us can handle. We need to make the decision as to what is savable property. That highly calculated manner. So if those two of us show up to a well-involved single-family residence, in that highly calculated manner, do we have savable property? Can the two of us go in there and actually do it? No, we can't. So we have to wait, and we have to wait until the fire burns down to our level. The other hand is, if it's just a trash can fire, certainly we can send somebody in there and save savable property. Highly calculated manner is our ability to read what's out in front of us and determine whether or not we have the resources and the tools we need to go in and put that fire out, and do it without endangering our lives to the point where we won't return. Strategy is pretty simple. We have two, and only two. We're either offensive or we are defensive. And offensive means we are inside, outside, or defensive means we are outside. When we talk about hitting it hard from the yard, that's still an offensive strategy, because the goal is we're knocking down the bulk of the fire before we make entry into the building. But we are going to go into that building. That's the goal. Defensive means nobody should be going into that building. Nobody should be anywhere within the collapse zone of that building. Defensive means no hoses are inside with people on them. We never fight fire inside a defensive building. I will talk a little bit more about that again later when we talk about things like strip malls. But generally, you are offensive, meaning you're inside, or you're defensive, meaning you're outside. Communications. So Blue Card is a command program. We talk about tactics and strategy, but we don't teach tactics and strategy. That said, we have to have a discussion about it, because in order to go through the simulations, you have to understand how we're going to put that fire out, how we're going to deal with the incident. It is a command class. I'm sorry? The biggest key to good command is good communications. If you can't control the radio, you're not going to have good communications. Again, in my early days in the fire service, we spent a lot of time trying to get a word in edgewise on the radio. Whether you were a crew inside trying to get information out, or you were the IC on the outside trying to find out what was going on the inside. Too many people talking. Again, this is why we go to a separate radio frequency. We need to have the ICs control communications. Right there, the IC drives communication. Also want to talk about the order model. This is how hazard zone communications need to be structured. Everything's around the order model. The order model is simple. The sender contacts the receiver. One of the things we talk about is when you're contacting the receiver, it's, hey, you, it's me. We never get on the radio and say, hey, me, it's you. It's always, hey, you, or it's me, hey, you. We always want to contact the receiver first. So Battalion 1 from Engine 1 means Engine 1 is the one who's doing the talking. They're trying to get Battalion 1's attention. Think about this. How many of you have ever arrived on the scene and given a radio report to dispatch only to hear dispatch come back and say, unit calling? Most of the time, not always. Remember, working the fire service, there's no such thing as always and never. Most of the time, as soon as you say the other person's name, the receiver's name, their ears perk up and they begin to listen. So they realize that you're trying to call them. The receiver acknowledges that. It's important because that's, again, you called on scene, but you never heard back from dispatch to say that they acknowledge that you're on the scene. We wait for them to acknowledge so you don't waste your breath and give that initial radio report only to find out they have no idea what you said or didn't even hear you. Then you go ahead and transmit your message, and then the receiver briefly restates or summarizes that message so that you know it's understood. The old game of telephone, where you start at one end of the room and whisper something in somebody's ear and then wait to see how it turns out at the other end. Is a good example of that. We want to make sure that the message coming out at the end is the same as the message that went in, but we want to briefly summarize it. We don't need to go into the same detail. Again, this also reduces radio traffic. It makes things a whole lot easier, makes communication go a lot faster. I do have a local department out here that talks about the communications on Blue Card and says that, all they do is talk the fire to death. No, they don't talk the fire to death. Communications is heavy on the front end, absolutely, because we need to give a great initial radio report. It's very important. It paints the picture for everybody who's arriving on the scene. And then we do a good follow-up report. But after that, it's just a matter of the incident commander giving task, location, and objectives, sending the crews to work, and then waiting until enough time has gone by that they should have been able to do what they need to do, and ask them, what's your status? How are things going on the inside? So we have 6 basic types of radio transmissions on the hazard zone. This is one of the things that we're going to be talking about. One of the things that switching to the Blue Card is helps with that communication. We have the initial radio reporting. We have the follow-up report, assigning units, command transfers, LCANs. So LCAN is location, conditions, actions, and needs. It would be a status update, status report. That's what an LCAN is. And I'll talk a little bit more about LCAN in a minute here, and why the term LCAN is, it used to be just called CAN reports, and then we added the location in there too. This is very similar to something else that we train on, and like I said, I'll get into that in a little bit more, why this works so well. And then strategic changes. So if we're switching from offensive to defensive, that's obviously something that we need to do on the hazard zone. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is with the IC driving communications, that means that crew should not be calling command unless something happens. The 7 things listed here are the reasons that the crew should actually be calling command. If they have a Mayday, Mayday obviously takes precedent over anything and everything else on the fire ground. Anytime there's a sudden bad event, so think flash hovers, think backdrafts or collapse or anything like that. Anytime there's a victim encountered. Roof reports, those containing significant tactical information. The other thing when we talk about roof reports, if you're told as an aerial crew or even as an engine company with a ladder, if you're told to go give a roof report, you were basically just told that when you determine the condition of the roof, you need to call command and let them know. That's an important piece of information, so that gives you that ability to break radio discipline. If you're unable to complete your assignment or your task, extremely important. Obviously, if I told you to go find the seat of the fire and put the fire out and you can't find it, as the IC, I need to know that right away. This next one is a little tricky. Concealed space fire is not easily controlled. That doesn't mean that if I open up an attic space in a structure where I suspect there might be an attic fire, if I open that up and find fire in the attic, you don't need to call command and tell them that because we kind of expected it anyway. When you need to call command as a crew to report that is if you put water on it and the fire the fire basically laughs at you. Then it's time to call command back and say, yeah, we're not getting this. We have concealed space fire and we're not able to control it. Water's not doing anything. Water has little effect. Those are important messages. So that we need to know. But if you open up a concealed space, put water on it and the fire goes out, well, we expected fire in a concealed space. You put water on it, the fire went out. We also expected that. We don't need to know that. It's the old good news equals no news. In other words, if things are going the way we expect, then there's no reason for you to call me. And then status changes. So status changes are something like exiting the structure, changing locations. So if you initially were assigned to the first floor, you've completed your search of the first floor, and now you're moving to the second floor, you need to call command and say, hey, we have a status change. We're moving to the second floor. We have an all clear and fire control on the first floor. That way the IC can account for you and knows where you're at. The status change is not going into the structure with your hose line, contacting command saying, we found the seat of the fire. We're putting water on the fire. We're having good knockdown of the fire. Those are things we actually expect. When I tell you, take a hand line off of engine 1, make entry through the alpha side, first floor, find the seat of the fire, put the fire out, give me all clear as fire control. I don't need you to tell me what you're doing every step of the way. Those are things I expect you to do. As a company officer, the way I looked at it was, if the crew doesn't know how to do that, whose fault was it? That was my fault. I should know what their capabilities are, and I should know that they should be able to do that without me micromanaging. To me, that's what that is them calling out, is they're expecting their IC to be a micromanager, and micromanagers we don't need and don't want. So it's one of the other things that makes this difficult for some ICs. It's hard for them to not be on the radio all the time. Oh yeah, good news equals no news. So again, unless we specifically tell you that we want the information, such as getting that roof report, you don't call us with good news. We'll eventually get around to asking you. So always arrive and position the apparatus. You got to watch those potholes in Michigan. They're kind of deep. Alan Brunacini said the initial radio report is probably one of the most important communications we transmit throughout an entire incident. Like I said earlier, this paints the picture of what you've got. How many of you have, and don't worry, I'm not expecting everybody to raise hands or answer. How many of you have sat and listened to the radio and listened to a crew respond to a report of a structure fire, only to have them call on scene and then say nothing else? It's kind of that everybody reaches up and starts gripping the dashboard type thing, and okay, say something, tell me something. I want to know what we're going to. I want to know what the incident is. Do I have to be all suited up, or am I getting ready to shut down my lights and turn around and go back to the station? Everybody wants to know. The second due incident commander, that chief officer, they're responding. They want to know what's going on. As far as painting an appropriate picture goes, I use the example of a structure fire that I went on to as an early incident commander or as early battalion officer. They reported that they were on the scene of a 2-story single family residence. And I admit, West Bloomfield has some large single family residences, but they said they were going inside with a 2.5 for fire control and search and rescue. I'm sure most of you have handled a 2.5 and know that a 2.5 is not going to do well inside any single family residence. It does not have the capability to move easily. Yes, it puts out a large amount of water, which is the only reason I could think of that they were taking this. But now it makes me wonder what kind of single family residence fire that they have that they need that much water that they can't get out of an 1 3/4 line. That painted a picture for me right out of the gate that something wasn't quite right. So when I rounded the corner at the end of the block and saw flames 30 feet above the roof, I kind of had a pretty good idea that these guys shouldn't even be inside because of that picture that was already painted, giving me an idea of what was not right with it. It helped me make the decision rather quickly to pull them out and go defensive on that fire. It was kind of funny that the younger of the two that went in said, made a comment. He said, "But we had that, Cap. We had that." Yeah, not so much. I think it had you. So again, the initial radio report is going to start out with clearing dispatch. In other words, calling dispatch, announcing that you're on scene. So the term clear dispatch means that you've contacted dispatch, let them know you're on scene, and they have actually responded to you. Again, make sure they hear you, make sure they're listening, because then you're going to give the building an area description. You're going to describe what's going on with the incident. You're going to talk about what your initial actions are going to be. You're going to declare a strategy. Is this offensive or defensive? You're going to assume and name command. And then you're going to provide what other resources. Are the 3 engines and 2 ladders you have coming going to be enough? Or are you going to need additional help? Again, don't be afraid to call for additional help. Think about where this could possibly go and what are the odds that it could go bad. Because if it's going to go bad, you're going to want the people already on the way rather than wait until something does go bad. And now that 15-minute response time feels like 15 hours because they can't get here fast enough. So dispatch from engine 1. So we've contacted dispatch first. Now you can say, once they've responded, engine 1's on the scene of, and now you can describe what's going on. So when we're talking about the building description, we have 3 basic things we're looking at. We're looking at the size of the building. Size does matter. We're looking at the height of the building, and we want to know what the occupancy type is. So when it comes to size, small, medium, large, mega. So most of us in the fire service look at size based on what we're familiar with, what types of fires we're going to, what kind of houses do we have in our respective response districts. We're going to change that entire dynamic. We're actually going to make this something so if you come into my community and we say we have a small building, a small house, you'll be able to identify that without ever seeing the building. And if I come to yours, it'll be the exact same thing. So we define a small building by how far 200-foot hand line can access. So most of us, and I realize there are some differences out there, some shorter, some longer, use a 200-foot pre-connect. I do know some areas that have 250 feet, some have 150 feet. But we're going to use the 200-foot as our mark. Figure you're spotted roughly 30 to 50 feet from the structure. A small building, that 200-foot hand line can access 100% of the fire area. That's a small building. Medium building, that 200-foot hand line can access about 75% of the fire area. So most of your single family homes are going to fall within one of these 2 areas, either small or they're going to be medium. Now there's nothing wrong with sizing up 1. So if you look at it and you say, well, this could be small or it could be medium, just go with medium. If it could be large, if it's one of the West Bloomfield, not quite McMansion, but close. Maybe it's medium to large, just go with large. Again, this helps you make that resource determination. How many people you need for a small building versus how many people you need for a medium building might not be too different, but how many people you need for a small versus a large makes a big difference. Large building, you can only get about half of the structure with that single 200-foot hand line. And we're also talking about floors as well with that. So when we say structure, we're saying the entire structure. And mega is anything less than 25% of coverage is considered a mega structure, a mega building. So typical single family residence is going to be small, maybe medium if we're looking at something like this. This is still considered a small building. I can get a single 200-foot, and if you look at how close we are, how close the road is to that, I can get a single 200-foot hand line from my truck and cover every part of the interior of that structure. Now we're probably getting to something that might be a little bit more towards medium. It's going to depend on how far off the road it is. It's going to depend on what direction we're coming from. If we come in through the garage down there at the end, on the Bravo side, we're definitely going to have more trouble reaching, the upstairs Delta side. So you might end up going with a medium on this particular building. And this would be probably a large building, because it's probably going to take me 2 or 3 hand lines to get that entire structure. So here we like to throw you off a little bit. Obviously, it's a 4-apartment building. And what would you think? A lot of people usually would say, well, it looks like it'd be large to me, or at least medium. So the question is, what's involved? And this really, I don't mean to throw in a monkey wrench or make anything confusing, but are you looking at just a single or a single occupancy fire? Or are you looking at something that's possibly into the actual structure of the building? Something that's actually into the structure of the building where spread is likely. And we're looking at a large building here. If you're looking at something where it's just one of those apartments and based on what you can see that it's a room and contents fire, then you're looking at it's a small apartment fire. Again, that same concept. Is it just a single room and contents fire that is not going to spread? If you can get in there and put the fire out, you're looking at something that's small versus something that's large. We get into something like this, you're looking at a large building, and I apologize. Usually this is where I throw it out to the class and have you all shout back at me and tell me what the size of the building is. This would be a medium building. You do have 2 separate businesses here, but it's still pretty much a medium building. Take one hand line, will get one business, one hand line will get the other business, and that's not going to be that big of a deal. You're starting to expand here, looking somewhere between a medium and large without knowing the actual building. It's hard to say. I'd need to know a little bit more about the layout. And when we talk about occupancies, really, we use a lot of generic terms in the class, but your districts, your response districts. So you have a pretty good idea. Well, keep it simple. What Walmart is. When you pull up in front of that, you don't need to tell me it's a mega retail shopping facility. It's Walmart. I know what Walmart is. That I can picture that in my head. I can tell you what to expect. So, but we still want an idea of what the size is. Maybe it's a super Walmart, so it's bigger than the standard Walmart. So we talked about this with the apartments. The strip mall is very similar. So the strip mall, you have individual units within that strip mall. Are you fighting just a single unit fire, or are you actually fighting multiple units, and how big is this fire and how fast is it growing? So again, the size of that structure is going to be dependent, what you call it is going to be dependent on what you actually have, what the incident actually is. Something like this, chances are there's mostly open ceiling through that. If there's not open ceiling, because it is truly open, it is open ceiling space, because all the wires and electronics and plumbing and HVAC, all that stuff is running through the entire building, and we know they did not do a good job of sealing that up. That kind of looks like downtown Traverse City, doesn't it, with the palm trees and the sunshine and well, maybe not so much. Seriously, that building, you're looking at a mega building there. You're starting to get kind of big, because it's going to take a lot of resources to deal with something like that. Your local Starbucks is probably small. You can probably get a single hand line through that entire building. The local Grainger warehouse, probably large. Same thing with what is that, Big Lots? I can't see what that sign says. Again, now we're back into the mega again. Here's something to think about as well when we're looking at a structure like this, is if it's an older office building, what does the interior look like? Probably a lot of offices, a lot of smaller compartments, a lot of smaller spaces inside. I'm still not calling this small by any means, but the interior certainly is going to change how we think about how the fire spread is going to happen in that building. Looking at this one, I'm going to say it's a newer complex, and it's probably going to have quite a bit of open space. So fire spread is going to be a major issue, making this probably a mega structure. And of course, then there's your true mega structure, your huge warehouses, distribution facilities. Think Amazon, one of their distribution facilities, or UPS, large postal distribution centers, not just your small post office. Well, those are going to be mega structures. And then add insult to injury, I think this one gave you a bowstring constructed roof on top of that. Height is pretty simple. How many stories above grade is what we're looking at. Yeah, consider sublevels. And this is a question that I'll be asking when I'm up there doing the certification lab. How many of you have structures that have sublevels beyond just a single basement? And the reason I ask is we went down to Detroit Metro and taught those folks Blue Card. And I found out that and I can't remember the name, though it doesn't really, I think it's the Westin Hotel that sits between the north and the south terminals. It actually has 5 sublevels. In a situation like that, that is now in addition to the height. You actually have 5 sublevels from the backside. From the front, you have, I think, 5 or 6 floors. On the backside, you have another 5. So that's when we want to know how many there are below grade. Typically, if it just has a basement, we just want to know it has a basement. So single family residence, 2-story. 3-story apartment complex. We'll talk a little bit about complex versus building. So earlier it looked like you had a 3-story standalone apartment building. Actually, the first one that I talked about was a standalone apartment building, it had 4 units in it. This, you can see off to the side, on the Delta side there, you can see another building in the background. Off on the Bravo side, there's another building up over there. So this is a part of a complex. So what's the difference? And how does this affect your decision-making process when you're responding to something like this? It makes a big difference on how we're going to get our folks there. In a single unit, basically all the parking's right there out front. Everybody has relatively easy access to it. In a complex, you usually have streets that go back and forth and snake around the buildings with sidewalks. You can't always get to the front. Sometimes this is all you have is access through the rear of the building. Through the Alpha side, all you have is balconies or sliding doors. You don't have the ability to make entry without using a ladder or breaking in the window. And we're not, unless we absolutely have to, we're not going to go in through one of those garden windows. That's not a good way or a safe way to go fight fire. It's like climbing in a basement window to go fight a basement fire. We typically don't want to do that. Height, that's a single story, so that's how we announce it as a single story. So the occupancy types, we have 7 basic occupancy types. So don't forget all the things you learned about in building construction. Those are all important, obviously, but we want to know what the occupancy type is when you're giving your initial radio report. And we'll go through the occupancy types real quick, and then we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break. But I want to get through this little piece here first, since we've already been talking about some of it. So the occupancy types, you have residential, multi-unit residential, public assembly, strip malls, commercial industrial, institutional, and high rises. So simple question, what do we call a single family residence? Call it a single family residence. You call it a house. You call it a home. Multi-unit residentials, we refer to them as apartments, condominiums, townhouses. In some areas, they're row houses. We all have that different terminology depending on where we're from, depending on how the building is constructed. But in your districts, you know what those buildings are. The nice thing about apartments, condos, townhouses, typically there's a name associated with that. So if you're responding to one of those, you know it by name. You know which one you're going to. Public assemblies are schools, churches, bars are considered public assemblies, restaurants, hotels, movie theaters. I realize most of us don't know what bars and restaurants are anymore. It's been almost a year since only recently we've been starting to go back to those again. But again, these are things that a lot of these we know by name. So yes, it's a public assembly, but if you're in your district and you're responding to, I'm going to use this one because we actually saw it today. A bunch of friends and I drove by it. Sam Adams Elementary. Well, everybody knows where Sam Adams Elementary is. So just say that's what it is. We're responding to Sam Adams Elementary. Strip malls, some have names, some don't. Sometimes they're anchored by big box stores, so you can use the big box store as the name. Makes it easy. One of the big things about describing the size and the height of these structures is, so when you have the bigger stores, the anchored stores on the end, it may be taller, but it may not really have 2 full stories. Think about a grocery store. A lot of the times at the front of a grocery store, sometimes it's concealed, sometimes it's not. There's a staircase so you can get to offices up above. Technically, that's not a 2-story building. It's a single story with a mezzanine level. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at the size of that building, and it's what the occupancy type is. Commercial structures, this one we'll use the term commercial structure quite a bit because a lot of these places change names about once a month. So usually used for manufacturing or distribution, small warehouses. So that would be your standard post office, not your major distribution center. Institutional occupancies, we all have the rest homes or assisted living that we go to on a regular basis. Your hospitals, your clinics, jails, things like that. And again, we typically know those by name. So I don't expect, and we generally don't talk about calling on scene of a 3-story large institutional building. No, tell me that it's Henry Ford Hospital in West Bloomfield. I'll know what you're talking about. All right, let's go ahead and take 10 minutes. By my clock, you got until 1:15, and then we'll start this back up again. Get you a chance, use the bathroom, get something to drink. See you in 10. All right, so let's move on. And like I said, we'll finish this up. Like I said, I don't want to keep you guys here all night, but I do want you to go through this and at least understand the language. One of the things that you'll find with the blue card, with the awareness is without having an awareness class or without having an awareness of what the blue card is, you get a lot of people struggling with what did they just say. So the awareness program is important for that reason, to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody understands what's going on and being said. So describing the problem. So for us, usually that means we're talking about fire conditions. If blue card isn't just for fires, I do want to say that right up front. It can also be used in EMS, and it can also be used in hazmat. There are actually separate modules for both. And for the EMS side, they're talking about mass casualty incidents or something like a multi-vehicle accident, something along those lines. And again, it's also used for hazmat. They do have modules that talk about that. So typically, though, what we're talking about when we teach the certification program and what you're going to hear most often when we talk about blue card are fire conditions. So typically there's four things we say. We talk about nothing showing, light smoke showing, working fire, or defensive fire conditions. I don't know how many of you have been through Dodson's Art of Reading Smoke. That is an excellent class. It's very informative, provides a lot of great information, but you don't need to say that over the radio. You don't need to talk about fast or rapid laminar flow. You don't need to talk about the color of the smoke. You don't need to talk about the smoke pushing or moving slowly. Those are things for you as the first arriving IC need to know and need to be aware of, but they're not important to the other people coming in because you're going to make your incident action plan based on what you're seeing and what you know, but that's not going to affect them. They're not going to gain anything from that. I'll be honest, I don't use the term light smoke showing. Either you have smoke showing or you don't have smoke showing. And typically, if you have smoke showing, then we consider that a working fire. And I'm not trying to change the way your folks do it. Again, this is adaptable for your location. It's adaptable for your department. Do come up with some basic terms within your own departments, but localize this, make it yours, make it work for you. So we need to describe where the problem is at. If we know where it's at, what floor is it on? In apartments and strip malls, is it on the end? Is it in the middle? And speaking of the end or middle of strip malls or apartments, when we talk about where the fire is located, if it's off to the Bravo or the Delta sides, but it's not all the way down there, and there's unburned areas on either side, we talk about the big or the little end. So the big end would be the end that has more left to burn, the little end being the end that has less to burn. Obviously, that's not part of the initial radio report, big end, little end, but we do talk about that down the road. And I'll be honest, I don't recall if this particular presentation actually brings that up again later. That's something we typically talk about during the certification program. For larger structures, so think something like a Amazon warehouse. What side is it on? Is it on the Alpha side? Is it on the Charlie side? Does the incident appear to be on the Bravo side? So you want to describe where it's at as well. Speaking of that, we talk about Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. We always name the structure clockwise around the building and call it that. And we also use Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. So, trick question, since I know there's a number of lakes up there, you arrive on the scene of a working house fire on a lake. What side is the front? You probably all got it right. The front is the water side, but is that necessarily Alpha? So Alpha actually becomes the side that you, as the first arriving officer, determine is alpha. If you want to say that the front of the building is the alpha side, and therefore on the lake house, when you arrive, you're approaching the Charlie side, you say that. The key is don't change it once you've made that determination. Once you've decided what alpha is, call it alpha. We used to say that the address side is the alpha side. That works great until you get to a corner house because it depends on how you approach that corner house. Sometimes the corner house, the address side, isn't the most accessible, so you make entry through the garage door side, which is on the other street. Sometimes we'll refer to that as alpha. But again, it's the key is first arriving officer determines what side is alpha. And we always use Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta because A, B, C, and D over the radio sound way too similar. So especially B, C, and D. You say those over the radio with all the background noise that we have going on, and it can get really confusing. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta are all easily understood. So in something like an apartment or a strip mall or something along those lines, identifying where that fire is extremely important. We need to know if it's on an end or an end occupancy, or is it in as the slide shows in the middle. Also, we need to worry about the exposures. So how do I identify the exposures? Everything that's to the right of the main occupancy as you look at it becomes Delta 1, followed by Delta 2, Delta 3. Same thing on the Bravo side. Bravo 1, Bravo 2, Bravo 3. We're talking about something where there's that chance where you have those multiple exposures. This isn't where houses, you have a Delta exposure and you have a Bravo exposure. You may have a Charlie exposure depending on the neighborhood and how the houses are laid out. But you're not going to have Delta 2 and Delta 3 exposures. It's just simply going to be Delta. But on the strip malls, the apartments, you will have to identify exposures as Delta 1, 2, 3, or Bravo 1, 2, 3, and so on. So when we're talking about describing the problem, we have nothing showing on this. So this is not going to be anything that we're worried about. Typically, your mode of operation at this point is investigating. This is where the light smoke showing comes in. And the location would be the alpha side of the structure. You have light smoke showing from the alpha. This amount of smoke, I get it. This type of smoke showing is with it being light. I understand why the term light smoke is, but usually where there's smoke, there's fire. I'm sure you've all heard that statement. So that's why to me this is always a working fire. By this point, yeah, definitely, I think you're going to have to call this a working fire. Here's the other side of that, using light smoke showing or smoke showing versus working fire. Working fire gets everybody into the mindset of, hey, when we get there, we're going to work. We're going to be busy. We're going to be active. They're not just sitting in the truck thinking, well, it could be something, but it might not be. I'd rather have my players showing up ready to go to work. So calling on the scene and saying we have a working fire when you have smoke, it gives me a better chance that they're going to be ready to go to work. This one, working fire, alpha side. One of the things I want to talk about now, we talked about earlier about making that decision as to whether or not we're going to go in and save savable property, save savable people. This is where we would typically ask when you look at this building. So think about this as you look at that building. Could there be savable people in there? Are there areas of that house that somebody could be survivable in that particular incident? Now we have a working fire, smoke showing from the Alpha and Charlie sides. Again, is there somebody that could be savable within that building? Start thinking about that in your thought process in trying to develop an IAP. You have a few seconds. You don't have to give that initial radio report right out of the gate. And even then, you have the ability to give that initial radio report before you determine your actual incident action plan, or while you're giving that radio report to determine that actual incident action plan. Definitely, I think you can say we have a working fire here. Working fire on the Alpha and Charlie sides. Is it possible that there's any survivable locations in that building? Take a look at it. I would answer yes, there is. The Bravo upstairs, second story, if they've got doors closed, I think you can go in through a window and make a quick snatch, get somebody out. I think that's very plausible. Of course, the garage area is still in pretty good shape. So if they managed to make it into the garage before they collapsed, that's also another survivable area. Again, working fire. At this point, I'm seriously considering defensive fire conditions. And defensive fire conditions, we really don't need to worry so much about the location of the problem, because if it's defensive, nobody's going inside anyway. Is any of that structure survivable? That would be the big question. And again, you look to the garage. If they made it to the garage and then collapsed, it's certainly possible. But other than that, I mean, this fire is going to be defensive, and you're not really going to be thinking about putting anybody in there. And this is absolutely defensible. There's not anybody, or the defensive fire, rather, you're not putting anybody into this building, not even into the garage. And again, you don't need to identify location. So a little clue sometime down the road when you see the structure again, we talk about follow-up reports. This is the key. Where was this fire? Probably this structure started out as a basement fire and then expanded through the house and before it became defensive. So again, describing the problem. What type of fire is this? In this particular scenario, you're looking at a two-story single-family residence with another two-story single-family residence right next door. In the primary structure, you have a defensive fire. In the delta exposure, you have a working fire. So you can be offensive in the delta exposure, and you'll be defensive on the primary fire occupancy. So your initial incident action plan, or IAP. So one of the things we talk about a lot with this is in the ICS or NIMS world, we look at big pictures. Typically, our operating periods are 12 hours. And every 12 hours, you start over again at the outset of that 12 hours. You start over again, developing a new incident action plan. In our world, our work cycles are as long as our air packs last, typically 20 minutes tops. Usually it's closer to 15. Our IAPs have to be developed a lot faster, and they're constantly changing. And it's something to keep in mind. Your work cycle is completely limited on the amount of air you have on your back and how long it will last. Here's a bit of trivia for you. I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to think about it for a second, and then I'll give you the answer. So you have two different fire crews. You have a single fire crew. You have 3 firefighters on the crew and an officer. You have one of the firefighters is average. They're all in their mid-30s. One of them's average build, average weight. One is definitely overweight, somebody who's not out of shape. And then the third is Mr. T. Bodybuilder, works out all the time. And you go inside this structure, all 3 of you have full air packs, all the same size tanks. And then your officer is in there. Who's going to run out of air first? And no, it's not the officer. it's going to be Mr. T. It's going to be the guy who's the fittest. And it's because his body uses the oxygen more efficiently and more of it than the other folks do. So he's actually going to be the one who runs out of air first. And we actually talk about that with a little bit with Brett Tarver, the firefighter who lost his life in Phoenix. Guy was in great shape, but he sucked down his air faster because his body has a higher demand for the oxygen than those of us who aren't in that kind of shape. So describe 3 items in the initial action plan. Basically what we're doing is we're giving our assignments. These are our tactics. Giving everybody a task. What do we want you to do? We need to tell you where to do it. And we need to tell you what the objectives is of those tasks. We want to tell you what, we want to tell you why, we want to tell you, we want to tell you where, we want to tell you why. Or at the beginning, task, location, objective, TLO. We frequently use the line, same clowns, different circus, when we teach this class. It's not meant as a derogatory statement, but when you think about it, we all have the same clowns, just a different circus. Doesn't mean these guys are bad, doesn't mean they intentionally screw up. It doesn't mean that they're not good firefighters. Some of these folks are some of our best firefighters, but they don't always do things the way that you intended or expected. Again, yes, I talked about company officers being responsible for making sure people are doing things the right way. Doesn't always work that way, much as we'd like to. Sometimes company officers can also be part of the problem. As an example, when a piece of fire apparatus shows up and you tell the engine crew, it's an engine company, you want them to go inside and put out the fire, you don't look at them and just say, go put out the fire. I'm not going to micromanage them on the other side of that and say, I need you to stretch this 1.5 inch hand line. I need you to take it through the alpha side door. I need you to walk 15 steps and turn left. We're not going to go that end either. But if I don't give them the basic what, where, and why, I'm going to end up with a fire crew that's going to take their hand line from the furthest engine away, not because they mean it's not because they're intentionally trying to do something to make things more difficult. It could be because they happen to be the furthest engine away and they just assume that you want them to take it off of their truck. We have to remind them to get a water supply, not because I don't trust them to get a water supply, but we need to remind them to make sure that they do it. In the heat of the battle, sometimes we do develop tunnel vision, even the best of us. It can happen. So it's just that simple reminder. Again, it's not micromanaging. Take your hose line off of engine 1. We want you to go into the alpha side and through the alpha side. That way I know where they're actually going. Go to the 2nd floor. So now I know specifically where they're at. Give me fire control and all clears. Now they know why I want them to go there. I shouldn't have to tell them anything more. But if I just tell them to go in there and look for fire and victims, maybe they go to the 1st floor and I've already got a crew working there. So it's not micromanaging to tell them what you want them to do and give them some specifics. Tell them where you want them to do it and tell them why you want them to do it. So TLO is not micromanagement. If it ever becomes that, then that's time for the leadership to sit down and say, hey, we got to cut down some of the radio traffic and not micromanage everybody. So typical tasks are, like I said, you'll get your own water, set up a master stream, force an entry, stretching a line. In the case of medicals, you're looking at triage or treatment. Location, what floor, what occupancy. Are you sending them to the Delta exposure, or are you sending them to the Bravo 1 exposure because you're in a strip mall? As we talked about big little end, are you sending them to the big end because you're worried that the big end is going to be your greatest risk of losing the most? So you always send them to the big end first. Tell them what side you want them to make entry on. We all have practiced RIT for a long time. we need to know what side the crew goes in on. Don't leave it up to them to decide. We need to make that decision for them. And then if you're working defensively, make sure you know what side they're operating on. That way, if something bad happens on that side, you can account for your crew. And again, why are you having them do it? Fire control, search, you have a confirmed entrapment, you're just protecting exposure. Tell them why you need them to do it. So again, offensive means we're putting people inside directly into harm's way. Defensive, they're outside in a safe area, a relatively safe area. Obviously, we've seen some folks that have been where they thought they were safe, and unfortunately they weren't. So use that term, relatively safe area. You are still technically in the warm zone, and the warm zone is still part of the actual hazard zone. So assume and properly name command. This street, if I remember correctly, this is Fillmore. So this engine is assuming command, is assuming Fillmore command. Keep something in mind. So in West Bloomfield, we had a road that ran, we had several roads that ran all the way across the community, but one of the longest was Orchard Lake Road running from north to south. How feasible is it, or how possible or likely is it that you could have more than one incident on Orchard Lake Road, on a road that's 8-9 miles long in one community? Think about that. If you have those types of roads, which most of you probably do, think about how you want to name that command. So yes, it's fine to use Main Street, but if Main Street is 20 miles long, you could certainly have a second incident on Main Street. So you might want to think about changing the name to a cross street. Another thing you can do, depending on where you're at, is the type of occupancy or the name of the occupancy. I will tell you, be careful with that because of some of the names. Remember, Sam Adams Elementary, we're on Sam Adams command. Coming across the radio, that's going to sound pretty interesting. And I've heard some others, some of the novelty toy shops. That's not exactly a command that you might want to call your command. You might want to pick a different name. So resource determination. Are you going to cancel everybody? You're going to continue all the crews? You're going to continue non-emergency? Are you upgrading to a box alarm or a second alarm? You need to make that determination. You need to announce what you need to arrive on scene. Do you have enough coming? Remember, you can always turn people around. That's why they put the steering wheel on the front end of those great big red trucks. So I'm not going to make everybody give that initial radio report. I will just go over a couple of them so you get a rough idea. So the initial radio report for this structure is going to sound something like this. Dispatch from engine 1. You're going to wait for dispatch to respond so that you don't have to give the initial radio report twice. And you're going to say something along these lines. Engine 1 is on the scene of a 2-story single family structure. We have a working fire on the second floor alpha side. We're going to be establishing our own water supply. We'll be stretching the hand line through the alpha side to the second floor for fire attack, search and rescue. We'll be in the offensive mode. We will be Main Street command. Go ahead and continue the balance of the alarm. Real simple. It can sound kind of wordy. We had radios, I don't know if we still use those radios, that would time out after 30 seconds. You could get all of that in less than 30 seconds. You still had time to spare. It really isn't that lengthy, but it paints a really good picture. You could have all sat with your eyes closed and known what it was I was talking about. So strip mall. Dispatch from engine 1. Engine 1 is on the scene of a medium-sized strip mall. We have a working fire in the Bravo end. We're going to be establishing water supply, taking a hand line off our apparatus for fire control and search and rescue through the alpha side. Be in the offensive mode. Will be Main Street Command, continue the balancing alarm. It's really pretty simple. So all these concepts, this initial radio report concept, think about that. Think about what you're seeing there. If you want, I'll give you a few seconds to write it down. You'll actually see a couple more slides. So as I go through a couple of them, write it down. One of the things that gets you really good at giving that initial radio report, besides just hearing it, is actually doing it yourself a few times. As a command officer, I had the luxury of driving around the township in my SUV and visiting all the fire stations and making sure everything was running smoothly. Everybody had what they needed to do their jobs. Through West Bloomfield, there's plenty of traffic lights, and I would pull up to a traffic light and sit there and look at a building on the corner, and I'd do an initial radio report. We had one of your young guys did a fantastic job right around shift change. They had gone on another fire and they were returning. They were in the aerial truck, and on the way back, they reported a structure fire. They pulled up on the scene, and he gave almost a perfect, matter of fact, it was a perfect initial radio report, right down to the T. The guy had never been through Blue Card, but he'd heard it enough and had the basic understanding of it. He gave everything, all the pertinent information. I already had a picture in my head of what was going on when I got there. Yeah, the picture ended up being a little bit distorted because he called it in as a kitchen fire, but the fire was actually at the opposite end of the residence. And that goes back to, quite honestly, we need to start training on some of this again. We don't do it often enough, but there's a lot of our younger folks don't know the basic layout of a house. Kitchen typically is right off of or within, going through nothing more than a mud or laundry room off the garage, usually very close. And this, like I said, was at the opposite end of the house. So do a lot of our young folks know where the stairways are? Well, typically when you walk into the front door of a two-story dwelling, where's the stairway? It's usually right there on the right or the left. On some occasions, it can actually be right there in front of you, but it's typically very close to that. And so when you're describing the problem and painting the picture, sometimes it helps to have that understanding, that basic building construction understanding. So some of those classes are classes we might need to start doing a little bit more frequently. On the scene of a large two-story apartment complex, we have a working fire in the Alpha Delta corner on the first floor. Establishing a water supply, stretching a hand line, entering through the Alpha side, fire attack and search and rescue, offensive strategy, Main Street Command, continue the balancing alarm. Or maybe I'm going to fill the box, which in our department, so the balance of our alarm, 3 engines, an aerial, and 3 rescues was typically what showed up to a first alarm. Fill the box meant you got all 6 engines in the department, all 5 rescues, and the aerial device. And depending on where you're at, it might include the tanker. Or am I going to upgrade this because this is going to be resource dependent, especially if this is a senior citizen facility? So give me a second alarm. So the key here is I need to know what the building is, describe it to me, give me a size, give me a height, give me the occupancy type, tell me what the problem is. If you tell me what the problem is, I can start to picture all of this in my head. Tell me what you're going to do about it, declare a strategy, take command, and then tell me if you're going to need more help or if you think you can handle this on your own. So again, the same thing. This one, we're going to add into that describing the problem. We have a working fire, first floor, Alpha side. We also have a working fire in the eaves of the Delta exposure. So you just add that extra information in there because that is still part of the problem. This will also help you make your resource determination. Can I handle it with just those 2 or 3 engines that I know are coming, or do I need more? Because essentially what you have in this particular situation is 2 separate house fires. Working fire, 3-story multi-family residential, middle occupancy, establishing a water supply. Work your way through this whole thing is stretching a hand line, taking it through the alpha side to the 3rd floor, fire attack, search and rescue, offensive strategy, Main Street Command, resource determination. Am I going to look at this depending on what I see? Am I going to look at this and say, this is going to be simply room and contents? Or am I going to look at this and say, that's on the 3rd floor, attic. Is this a true row house? So for those that aren't familiar with row house construction is solid wall, typically brick, from above the roof line down to the foundation. Or is this an apartment complex made to look like row houses, and it actually has a common attic space? So if that fire is out on the 3rd floor and it gets into the attic, what have I got? I've got a large fire going here, and I'm going to need a lot of resources for that. So, and what I just described, that's what this scenario is. You have a working structure fire. So you're on the scene, large 3-story apartment building, working fire, 1st floor spreading to the 2nd floor and 3rd floor, and probably the attic. Establishing water supply, stretching a hand line, fire attack, search and rescue on the primary fire apartment. Being the offensive strategy will be Main Street Command. Give me a 2nd alarm. Because if this thing gets into the attic space, which looking at what I'm looking at right there, I'm just going to make the assumption that it has. I'm going to need a lot of help because I've got 15 apartments that I have to clear to make sure that everybody's out of this and everybody's safe. And I want to try and save that building if I can. If I can get a good hit fast. I talked earlier about hitting it hard from your yard. This is one of those perfect scenarios. If you pull up and you see something like this, hit it with the deck gun on the truck, and that might make most of your problems go away. Alan Brunacini used to say, put the wet stuff on the red stuff and all the bad stuff goes away. I mean, really, it's that simple. We talk about entering structures. I don't know if any of you still do this or have ever done this, going into a structure with an uncharged hose line. If you know the structure's on fire, the building's on fire, why wouldn't you take the one resource with you that you know can address that fire? I know a lot of people will say, well, I do it for expediency. I do it because I can move faster. And then you have to wait when you come across that fire to actually spray water. One of the things that Brunacini learned and tried to share was, when I was a young firefighter, I went in and we would do a left-hand or a right-hand search almost right out of the gate, instead of going straight to the fire. Alan Brunacini realized that if you go straight to the fire, not bypassing victims that are on the way, but if you go straight to the fire, not searching the side rooms and put the fire out, everything gets better. It's easier now because everything cools off. You can now start ventilating the building. You can get fresh air in there. So if there were some problems with where they were at as far as what they had in the way of fresh air, you've now improved it. You've taken away the heat. You've just made the whole scenario better for them. So you do far more good by putting the fire out than you do by taking the time to do that extensive search on the way to the fire. So we need to remember, primary search is going directly to the seat of the fire. You're searching what you can see along the way, not going off to the side rooms and getting sidetracked, so to speak, by all the other part of the building. So again, this is back to the strip mall. Fires in the center occupancy, so we need to make sure that we mention that there are Delta and Bravo exposures on this. That would be part of the building description or describing the problem. That's when you mention that there are exposures. So once you've given a follow-up report, it's incumbent upon you as the incident commander to make your best effort to do a 360 around the building. Remember, we're doing a size up. We start size ups right from the time of the incident, the time that call comes in. On the way there, what additional information you may receive, you update your size up. When you get on scene and see what you see, you make your initial radar report based on that size up. Now you need to go around and see the rest of the building so you can do an additional size up and see what else is going on with the building that you couldn't see just from the front. So we start by determining where accountability is going to be. And this is something that's going to be dependent upon your accountability system. A lot of departments have gone to some type of a tag system, and you bring the tag and leave it someplace. So we need to announce where you're leaving those tags. And then if the building, if it's possible, we'll do the walk around and go completely around the building so we can see all sides. For those buildings that are larger or have limited access, think about this when it comes to your 360. What we're taught as young firefighters when we approach a building is we come at it from one direction so you can see one side of the building. Let's say we come at it from the Delta side, so we have a good view of the Delta side. So we pull into the front of the building, we're now looking at the Alpha side, and then we pull just past the building, gives us a decent view of the Bravo side. There's 10-foot fences with razor wire on the top around this house. Must be in a bad neighborhood. You're probably not going to be able to do a 360, but you can do a 270. And you can announce that you were able to do a 270. So the 360, some of the other things we're looking at is the number of stories from the rear. Typically what that means is there a basement? So as you walk around the back, did you see something more? Or is it like the Westin down there between the two terminals in Detroit? And it actually has five levels below grade. You'll re-announce the problem and location if it's different from the initial radar report. So if you announce the fire as being on the Alpha side, and now you walk around because that's where the bulk of the smoke was coming from, and you walk around and find that you have what they refer to as a lookout basement, something with the garden windows in it, or escape windows, if you will. If it has that type of a basement, you actually see flames coming out of those windows, you're going to announce that the fire is actually in the basement on the Charlie side. So you want to make sure you give that update. If you come across any immediate life safety or rescue concerns, is there somebody hanging off the backside? Christmas night fire that we had many years ago, it actually initially came in as somebody through the ice on a lake. The crew pulled out of the first due station, and as they were on their way to that call, somebody came running out into the road and said, "Hey, this house is on fire right here." So they called it in, stopped, got out of the truck. While the officer was doing his 360, there's a naked man on a shed style roof on the back of the house who had been calling for help. That was the guy that they thought had fallen through the ice, just because his voice carried across the lake. But doing that 360 allowed the officer to realize, oh, hey, we've got an immediate life safety concern out back here. And then any other critical factors you need to know. Are there utilities down or something exposed to the fire, such as the gas meter? That's never a good thing. Mean, vicious dogs. And actually not just any dog. I don't know. I've lost count of the number of times I've been run over by a dog or a cat going into a structure fire because they're obviously trying to get out like everything else. So you might want to make that announcement that these animals are there. They're not mean or vicious. They're just trying to get away. Pools, that's another one, especially in-ground pools. There's nothing more. What's the word I want to use? Exhilarating? Maybe scary. Walking around doing your 360 and you walk through the bushes, almost stepping into the in-ground pool because you didn't see it there due to the smoke. So those are things you might want to tell the folks about that are on the way. So some of the immediate concerns would be maybe there's a potential collapse area because you can see significant damage to the backside of the structure that you didn't see. Are there excess roof loads that aren't there? Are there power lines down and arcing? And as I talked about, the gas meter exposed to the fire, bad dogs, swimming pools, and all that type of thing. So when you transmit that follow-up report, it works very similar to the initial radio report. Again, you contact and clear dispatch. Make sure they're paying attention. Dispatch from now your command. You are no longer whatever your truck assignment is. Dispatch from command. And when they acknowledge you, you let them know that you're giving the results of your 360. Dispatch, we've completed our 360. We have a working fire on the Charlie side, and it is impinging upon the gas meter. There are no changes to the incident action plan. Accountability will be on the Alpha side with engine 1. And the communications plan, this is one of those things, it's a locality thing. We immediately changed once we were sent to what was believed to be a confirmed fire. We automatically switched over to the new radio channel before we started rolling out of the station, or as soon as we rolled out of the station, rather, and told dispatch we were rolling. Other departments have the ability to just push a button on their CAD system. Some wait until they're on the scene to make that radio change. Make sure it gets transmitted however it does, because you want everybody on the same channel, literally on the same channel when they get there. Has anybody's ever tried to switch radio channels when you're inside a structure because you forgot or you had it on the wrong channel? You know that's nearly impossible. It's why when we teach the Mayday class, it's why we teach that the Mayday remains on the primary fire channel. It never switches because that person who's trapped inside cannot switch their radio channel easily or safely. So accountability location, like I said, it's usually on the Alpha side. Really what it boils down to is wherever you decided you wanted to put your primary piece of fire apparatus, and it lets everybody else know where they're dropping their tag off, if that's the type of system you're using, where they leave their clips, where they leave whatever it is that they use to identify themselves and what unit they're with. So basement types, kind of obvious here, there's no basement structure built on a slab. Standard basement, note the small, oh, hey, look, I can do that. Note the small windows here. Nobody's going in or out of those. Maybe with some extreme difficulty, you can get out, squeeze out, but most people aren't going to use that for access. So we need to, that's why we need to know if it's a standard basement. Basement fires, I don't know how many of you have fought basement fires, but there's nothing more fun than going down the chimney, going down that stairway to try and get into the basement and put the fire out. Basements with limited access like this, you need to know about that. The other reason we want to know that there's a basement, is simply the fact that there's a basement, is because we need to know if there's a possibility that we're working above the fire. Well, I don't like putting crews above the fire because I don't know what the status of the floor is. I know you've got a mix of structures up there just like we did. You've got older construction up there and you've got newer construction up there. Those old structures will burn forever and you never have to worry about them. The newer structures, 6 minutes or less. I don't know if any of you have seen the I've seen the UL videos where they showed the firefighters. They showed two of them, one crawling and one standing on a floor of lightweight construction, and how quickly they went through the floor. The stuff burns quick, and we need to know if that's a risk. Need to know what's below us. So you have walkout basements, a couple of different kinds. Let me see here real quick. Yep. So walkout basement, we typically, from the front, you can't always tell, but if you know there's a hill behind it, it could have a walkout basement. They refer to these as walk-up basements, but let's keep it simple. let's just call it a walkout basement, because that's what it is. You can walk out of it. Yeah, it's just a stairwell. I'll admit, that's kind of an interesting basement. It can make for some difficulty maneuvering sometimes to get some stuff around those corners. And I'm not talking about furniture. I'm talking about it for what we do. But it's still just a walkout basement, because we don't want to come up with 20 different terms for one common thing. So it's still walkout basement. So initial radar report for something like this is going to sound like this. So engine 1 is called dispatch and cleared dispatch. Engine 1, we're on the scene of a small single family 2-story occupancy. We have a working fire with smoke coming from the Alpha and Charlie sides. Establishing a water supply, taking a hand line off our engine, entering through the Alpha side for fire attack and search and rescue on the first floor. We'll be in the offensive strategy, Main Street Command. Go ahead and continue the balance of the alarm. Get out of your truck now and do your 360. And this is what you see. So now when you call dispatch, it's dispatch from command. Command, go ahead. 360 is complete. We found this structure has a basement. We have a working fire on the Charlie side of the basement. We're going to be taking a second hand line off of our engine, stretching to the Charlie side for a quick hit. Then we'll be making entry on the Alpha side for search and rescue and fire control. Accountability be engine 1 Alpha. And that gives everybody now knows what you've got. Rather than taking the time to redeploy the first hand line, just grab a second one. You're going to be using that first one anyway down the road. So go ahead and let them stretch around the back, and you do a quick hit on this. Now, this one's a little confusing because this does look like a door over here. So we just call it a door anyway, make it easy. And that's why you're going to make entry through there and knock that down. So again, assigning units. What are we assigning to do? What's the very first thing, most important thing we need to do on a building fire? Put the fire out. So we want to make sure we address those critical factors. We want to make sure we get water on the fire. We want to make sure we get some searches going. We want to make sure we've got some recognition of what the stability of the structure is. Achieving those tactical benchmarks of all clears, fire control. And then we want a tactical reserve. This is where that staging stuff comes in. So the first arriving officer's got on scene now. He's given his initial radar report. He's done his 360. He's made his initial assignment for his crew. So the next arriving engine shows up. They call level 1. So they're not going to call dispatch. They're not going to call command. They're just going to announce that they are level 1. Now they're just waiting for that assignment. Command has gotten all his initial stuff done. Engine 2 from command. Go ahead. I need you to come up. Take a second hand line off of my truck. Take it to the second floor through the Alpha side for fire attack, search and rescue, etc. If the first crew, this is something you can probably get, you can bring engine 2 up and put them on deck. So remember earlier tonight, I talked about on deck. So what is on deck? As I said, think about baseball. The on deck person in baseball, we know, is the next to go be the batter. We all got heavily into rapid intervention. We talked about how great it was. We said, this is the wave of the future. This is how we rescue firefighters. And what do? Unfortunately, what we do with rapid intervention, we found that is not so rapid, in part because typically it's the third engine in or something along those lines. They get assigned. It's an assignment down the road. They might be doing a softening of the building. They might be taking a look around the building. But 9 times out of 10, thankfully, our rapid intervention people don't do anything. They just kind of stand there. I know a department where they refer to the rapid intervention guys as the shepherds. because they all stand there with the hook in their hand, leaning on their hook, not doing anything, just looking out over everybody. Excuse me. When it comes time for them to actually go to work, should they have to go to work, most of them aren't dressed and ready to go. So Phoenix came up with this concept of on deck. First priority of the on deck crew is to bring up the rapid intervention equipment. Now, there's a lot of departments that have adapted the on deck, still keeping the rapid intervention, which is cool and it works. But the first job of the on deck crew, if you assign someone to that, is to bring up the initial rapid intervention equipment. They may not be your primary rapid intervention, or it may not be the primary rapid intervention equipment, but it's equipment that you need to do a basic rescue. So it's there. They're standing there on deck. What do they know? They know that they are the next to go into that building. So how are they going to be dressed? If I know I'm getting to go in and play, I'm going to be ready to go play. Using that concept of staging in the front yard, when I would walk up to that group of people standing there, I didn't ask for 4 volunteers for a crew to go in and do something. I looked at the 4 people that were geared up and ready to go, because that's who I wanted. I knew they were prepared. I knew they were ready to go play. That's the concept with that tactical reserve, the on deck. If something goes bad, I've got a crew right there ready to go in. If something changes and I need an additional crew right away to supply support for that to reinforce that first crew, I've got a crew right there ready to go. No questions asked. I'm not searching for anybody. I've got a crew ready to go. It's called the tactical reserve. As you build that tactical reserve, we get into what we call the 3 deep deployment. And that's where we're putting somebody still in level 1. We still have that engine. We still have that aerial sitting by their last tactical objective and not moving beyond that point until they're called up. Once we give those assignments, we have to remember task, location, and objectives. Tell them what we want them to do. Take a second hand line off of my engine. Where do we want them to do it? Make entry through the alpha side, go to the 2nd floor. What is it we want them to achieve? Why do we want them to do this? Because we want you to get fire control or check for extension. Get me all clears. All clear means you're doing a primary search. All right. Everybody come back at 1/4 after. We'll go ahead and take a break, and then we'll be able to finish this thing up. All right, let's finish this thing up. So command transfers. So obviously the best thing to do is do a face-to-face transfer so that we know that's the best form of communication. However, if your initial incident commander is inside with his crew, you're not going to be able to do that via face-to-face. You're not going to have them come out just so they can do a command transfer if they're in the middle of the firefight. So we're going to do that transfer over the radio. So the second arriving incident commander, the chief officer, whoever that happens to be, whatever rank they happen to be, When they arrive on scene, they are the only other vehicle that comes directly to the scene. So they show up right at the scene. They don't go level 1. They arrive on scene. They announce that they're on the scene. Dispatch responds to them. This is the one piece of apparatus that tells dispatch that they're on the scene. That second IC number 2, then contacts IC number 1 so that they can give a command transfer. This is real simple. They confirm the location. They confirm what the incident commander had. They confirm the location and assignments of the crews that are on the scene. And then they ask what the conditions and needs of the crew they're talking to are at the time. And then they take command. They announce that they take command to IC number 1. IC number 1 then acknowledges that they're taking command. IC number 2 then notifies dispatch that they are taking command. Dispatch acknowledges that they're taking command. So you've announced that command transfer 4 times. The reason this is so important is because this way everybody knows command has moved from inside that building to an outside location. Remember, there can only be one person who's command. We do that transfer so that everybody can hear it, and everybody knows now that the person who's now in charge is sitting outside, can actually see what's going on, can actually review and look at the big picture. This is where radio discipline is extremely important. Don't call with status changes. Don't call with much of anything unless you have priority traffic. Remember, priority traffic is really, we've encountered a victim, we've had a sudden bad incident, we have a mayday. Those are the things that can interrupt that command transfer, but otherwise, nothing should interrupt that command transfer, including crews calling level 1. If you still have apparatus that's responding and they're going level 1, nothing else should be said on the radio so that IC number 2 has good, clear communication with IC number 1. So let's get into the LCANs. This is what's going to happen is IC number 2 comes in, they take command from IC number 1. They've gotten a brief summary. At the end of that summary, they ask IC number 1 for an LCAN. What does LCAN mean? Location, conditions, actions, needs. What does this look or sound like? We probably do this training once a year, if we're lucky. Kind of looks like Lunar. So the difference between Lunar and LCAN is we don't really talk about, well, actually, we don't mention the name is really about the only thing we don't talk about. You don't have air in there, which the A in Lunar stands for air, but that's covered under the needs. So if you think about it, if we give a location, so he knows already who he's talking to. Give your conditions. So what are you experiencing? I still have working fire in here, have heavy smoke. What are your actions? Putting water on the fire, I am getting good knockdown, I'm getting good conversion. Do you need anything? Yeah, we've been in here a while, our guys are getting low on air, we'll probably need to come out and recycle. Location, conditions, actions, needs. One of the things we talk about when we talk about Maydays is making a switch from Lunar, something we may use once a year in practice, to LCANs, something we use every single incident. What's important now is that you've had that command transfer. He's talked to the first arriving officer, who is IC number 1. He asked for that LCAN. So he gets the location, so it reaffirms that they're where they said they were or where he assigned them. Gets the conditions. He knows what they're up against. They're painting that picture. They're painting a picture of what's inside. They tell him what they're doing about it, and they give him any needs. If you don't have any needs, look, I'm in here fighting fire. I've still got working fire. I'm putting water on it, getting good knockdown. You still have plenty of air. Everything you're doing is right. you just tell the incident commander, I have no needs. So you make that announcement. To get you in the habit of always remembering that there's got to be some kind of need communication in there. So location, conditions, actions, needs. Once battalion one, once IC number 2 has arrived on scene and has taken command and gotten that information from the first arriving incident commander, he or she is now going to turn around and look at the next unit that's arrived on scene and ask for an LCAN from them. So in our scenarios, ladder 1 always shows up next. Ladder 1, give me an LCAN. Ladder 1, we're working on the second floor. We've got good conditions up here. We found no extension. We have all clears. We have no needs. He's given his location. He's given his conditions. His actions were that he got the all clear and he has no needs. If engine 2's on scene, go to engine 2 next. Engine 2 from command. Go ahead, command. Give me an LCAN. We're in the Delta exposure. We had working fire in the attic. We put water on it. We've got good knockdown. We've got no, well, we're going to need another crew to come in and search the first floor and check for extension. IC number 2 comes back with copy, Delta exposure, second floor, had an attic fire, but you've got good knockdown. I'll get you another crew as soon as I can to take care of the first floor. Simple acknowledgement, understanding, so that communication goes both ways. Everybody knows what's going on. Now you've got nobody else on scene. You're just waiting for the other crews to arrive. What do? This is the hard part. This is what's really weird, is everything just gets quiet and you sit there. Don't immediately go back to engine 1 and start asking for an LCAN again, because about the third time you get around to doing that, engine 1's going to respond with, well, maybe if you'd stop calling me, I'd actually have a chance to do some work and give you something different. So the LCAN is really important. It gives you the opportunity as the incident commander to drive the communications, to own those communications, and allows you to talk to each crew individually and get what's going on the inside. It's extremely important that you allow that free airtime in the middle, though, because if something bad does happen, it also gives them the opportunity to come in and say something. So the dead airspace was the most difficult thing for me to get used to when we went to Blue Card, but I found that it gave me a chance to check my notes, made sure I wasn't missing anything, and then using the LCAN format for every single status report or update or whatever you want to call it, using that LCAN format gave me the same information every time from every crew, and was always consistent. So it gave me what I was looking for and what I needed to know. So real basically, what your LCANs are, your conditions, any obstacles, smoke conditions, fire, heat. Is there something odd about the interior layout? Is there more than one fire? Little things like that. Look, our actions. Your actions are all clears, fire control. You can't find the fire. You have concealed space fire. We don't do PARs, and I'll tell you why. The big reason we don't do PARs is, we talk about this a lot in the certification program, but we don't do PARs not because we don't care about accountability, because as I've said right from the get-go, this is about better accountability. But we also don't want to micromanage. I also said that we don't want to micromanage. And I have officers in there in charge of those crews. Shouldn't I be able to trust my officer to know if he has PAR or she has PAR? If they don't have PAR, shouldn't they be calling me? I shouldn't even have to ask. That should be a mayday right out of the gate. And it shouldn't take me talking to them and asking them for a PAR for them to be constantly doing a PAR. That can be part of their LCAN thought process. They can look around and make sure, yeah, I still have PAR. Might be that gentle nudge or a reminder to them, but I don't need to hear that they have PAR. I expect you to have PAR, because if you don't, you should have already been calling me with a mayday. And then your needs: reinforcement, relief, air, tools, equipment, something like that. Urgent help, really not so much, because urgent help is actually going to be priority radio traffic. So you're actually going to be calling, so we've got priority traffic, and making that announcement that way, and getting the urgent help you need. So in LCAN and this structure here, you're actually looking at that that same wall, that delta wall that you're looking at from the outside. So to give an LCAN for this is going to sound something like engine 1 from command, give me an LCAN. Engine 1, we're on the first floor along the delta wall. We are checking for extension. All we have at this time is light smoke. We have no fire. We're still checking along that wall, and we have no needs. On this one, you're on the second floor. Ladder 1 from command, give me an LCAN. Ladder 1, we're on the second floor in the Alpha Delta corner. We've opened up the ceiling. We have heavy fire involvement. We've been hitting it with water and getting good knockdown. We could use another crew up here to open up ceilings. That's it. Your LCANs are short, sweet, simple, basic location. Give me the conditions of what you've got. Tell me what you're doing about it, and tell me if you need anything. And if you don't need anything, tell me you don't need anything. So again, same thing. You have knockdown, you have primary all clears, knockdown, extension to the attic, joist space. Now, where are you in that? You're in that first floor apartment. I'm in the first floor apartment. We have primary all clears, knockdown, extension to the attic, joist space. We're getting good knockdown with that. We have no needs. This is a bad one because you've encountered a victim again. That's priority traffic. That said, when you contact command from ladder 1 with priority traffic, go ahead with your priority traffic. We are on the second floor. We've encountered a victim. We're going to need some help getting them out. And then it goes on. So again, it's the same thing over again. So organization, obviously we need to have a good incident organization to run things smoothly, sectors, divisions, and groups. Remember your span of control. You can only control up to 7 groups at a time. One of the things that I said earlier, we don't use groups. It's because I can't account for them if they don't have a specific location that they're working in. For me as a command officer, I use divisions where floors. If I had separate floors, then I had a division. Sectors were a Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta designation. That's what I considered a sector. I talked about the 3 deep deployment model. We want to make sure that we have enough resources on scene to help, to make sure that we can handle anything bad that happens. So your first level is those that are actually working in the hot zone. Your second level is the crews, or are the crews that are on deck ready to go to work. We have 1 on deck crew for every crew that we have inside working. And then your third level, 3 deep deployment, is your staging crews. These are the resources that you have. These are the resources that you have that are available if you should need them. We'd already talked about on deck extensively. They're next up. Once the crew is assigned on deck, their first priority is rapid intervention. But they're also assigned to relieve an existing crew that's working inside. They can reinforce that crew, or they're ready to go to work in a new position if they need to go to a new position, if they have something else that needs to come up. One of the things that we really liked about the on-deck concept as well is recycle versus rehab. To recycle means you come out, maybe get a drink of water, switch out your air bottle, and then you go right back on deck. So you're ready to go back in again. Rehab means you come out, you undress a little bit and cool off, try to get some vitals checked, maybe depending on how your system is set up, grab a snack. You're basically out of play. On deck, you're back into play again. And if that crew has already been in that building and something bad happens now, who better than that crew to go back inside and help out the existing crew that's in there, or the crew that's actually working in there. So that on deck crew actually comes out really nice. Puts the resources in the correct positions prior to the need. Like I said, you don't have to get rid of RIT. A lot of departments that we've gone to that have adapted Blue Card to their situation still have a separate RIT assignment. On deck is a resource that's put into a position. They're next to go to work. There's nothing wrong with having both. Matter of fact, maybe it's even better. But you may find that you can get rid of that RIT now and replace them totally with on deck, depending on how your resources show up and what you have available. It gives the officers, the sector division officers, the sufficient resources to get the job done because those people are already standing there ready to go to work. And it puts them in the best position to keep pace or put them ahead of the incident problems power curve. It really makes it nice when you're doing the recycle because crews can have that actual face-to-face contact. It improves the standard work cycle, allows people to come out and recycle as opposed to rehab, gives them that the crew's already there ready to work, so they're not coming out sucking down that last little bit of air on their tank unless they did that themselves. Real quick, let me talk about air supply. So air supply, you figure you have roughly 20 minutes on most tanks. So you look at that air supply, the only air we have is the air we carry in with us on our backs. The atmosphere inside that burning building is not something that we can live in. We can't breathe that and survive for very long. So all you have is that 20-minute air supply. So they've changed things, and I don't know how your air packs are set up. And you might have a variety there. It used to be air packs had they were broken down into quarters. I know the new standards have set everything up to thirds. So we're going to go with the new standard and talk about it that way. The first third of that air tank, the first third of that 20 minutes belongs to the fire department and belongs to the citizens you serve. That is their air. That belongs to them. When you go inside that burning building, that 6 point some odd minutes, that's the amount of time that belongs to the fire department and the citizens we serve. That second third of air belongs to the people who care about you, the people who expect you to come home. If it took you 6 minutes to get into the seat of that fire, to go to work, how long do you think it's going to take you to get back out? It's probably going to take you pretty close to that same 6 minutes. That last third of air, that last 6 minutes, that's the something hit the fan air. That's the stuff you need to survive until somebody else can get to you. So think about your air supplies that way. Think about how long we work. Like I told you guys, I'm old. I've been around for a while. Matter of fact, when I first started in the fire service, not everybody was wearing an air pack. And the only reason that I was told to wear an air pack was because some of the leadership was starting to get that change in that thought process that maybe we should all go on air. So a lot of the guys still didn't wear it. But those of us that were on air, we were told, you don't come out until that bell goes off. You stay inside and work unless something bad happens, but you stay inside and work until that bell goes off. That bell goes off, how much air do we have left? I've been in there for 10, 15 minutes, and now the bell goes off. If something bad happens, I've got no reserve. It's down to nothing because usually the bell starts going off, and the first conversation that happens is, well, whose bell is it? Well, back then we used to say, okay, we'll go out and get a new air tank, and everybody else stay inside working. We don't do that anymore either. One comes out, everybody comes out. So think about that air side of it. Our standard work cycle, this helps us come out because they've come out, they're not all beat up, so they can recycle instead of going to rehab and turn around and go right back into work. And again, it allows the sector and division officers to manage the details of their sector. So we already talked about recycle. It's that quick break. You're still assigned to the same area, and it keeps everybody ready and gets everybody to go back out into work. Rehab. So rehab, unfortunately, we still aren't doing rehab right. We bring you out and want you to sit down, and we say we're going to rehydrate you. Quite frankly, if you're thirsty, it's already too late. You're already dehydrated, and it's going to get worse before it gets better because it takes a long time for the body to actually rehydrate. It doesn't happen real quick. You shouldn't be drinking straight water. You shouldn't be drinking straight Gatorade. You actually should be drinking a mix of the two because it creates a more of an osmotic ability for it to transfer back and forth easier. Ironically, the best beverage you could actually drink, if it wasn't for the alcohol, to actually help you rehab faster would be beer, because it actually is the closest to your own body's fluids. So your body absorbs the nutrients immediately without flushing any nutrients or water from your body into your stomach first to make everything equal. So rehab provides for a longer rest period, gives you a chance to get something to eat. You're now assigned to a completely different group. You don't go back right to work. You actually more or less go back to a level 1 type position, and then you can be pulled from that position to go back to work later after you've had that break. Excuse me. So command function 7, review, evaluate, and revise. So we want to make sure that the current IAP is working and doing the job that we expect it to do. Remember what we talked about with size up. Size up starts from dispatch and continues all the way through the entire incident. We're constantly doing that size up, constantly reevaluating what's going on. Are we doing the right thing? Are we meeting our tactical objectives? Is everything getting done, and are all our guys safe? Are we covering what needs to be covered? That constantly needs that upgrade to that incident action plan is constantly being upgraded, constantly being improved upon. If things are getting worse, do I have enough resources? If I don't, am I calling for enough resources? If things are getting better, can I start cutting some of those resources loose? Can I start working other groups into rehab instead of into recycle, where I have that flexibility? Do I need to bring in more water? Do I have to put out another hose line? Or can I start shutting hose lines down? So one of the things we also talk about is switching to a defensive strategy from an offensive strategy. You've been working on the structure. It is truly now a structure fire, and we now want to switch to defensive. So we talk about priority traffic and we talk about emergency traffic. The only person who actually uses emergency traffic is the incident commander. And that emergency traffic is a request to dispatch for emergency traffic. Remember what we said about the strongest radio on the fire ground. The strongest radio is dispatch. Anybody and everybody can hear dispatch because their radio is that powerful. The IC calls dispatch, ask for emergency traffic. If your department has some type of emergency tone, they'll set off that tone, that alert through the radio, so everybody's now paying attention. The IC makes an announcement to everybody that's on the scene. We're switching from an offensive strategy to a defensive strategy. All units either exit or abandon the structure. Give PARs upon exit. Now, if your dispatch has been trained, has had the opportunity to train, and we do offer that training if they want it or would like it. A lot of times different organizations will have dispatchers come in while we're putting on our certification programs so they understand what we're talking about. There's nothing worse than having a dispatcher ask you what a horizontal sandpiper is when you're actually asking for a horizontal standpipe because they had no idea what you were talking about. Believe it or not, a lot of your dispatchers have no clue what the tools are called on your trucks. As a matter of fact, if you call something a truck, it's something big red with lights on the top. They don't realize that a truck has all kinds of aerial devices on it. That an engine or a pumper is the truck that we use to actually put water on the fire normally. So dispatch needs to repeat this back. And the reason we want them to do that is because, again, they have the loudest radio or the strongest radio. They get that message out. Everybody hears and understands them. Once everybody comes out, we're not asking for anything special. We're giving you permission to announce on the radio that you're out and that you have a par. Now, exit is in green there, abandon is in red. What's the difference? When you tell everybody to exit the structure, that means bring your toys and leave the sandbox. If we ask you to abandon the structure, it means leave your toys in the sandbox and get your butt out any way you can as fast as you can. So that's the difference between exit and abandon. Function 8, we continue support and terminate command. So continue support and terminate command. So some of the stuff that we talk about when we're talking about this section here is as the incident winds down, remember as things built up, we started out with IC number 1. IC number 1 is that first arriving officer. They're typically inside with their crews. Things are bad enough. IC number 2 shows up. They take command from IC number 1. We transfer that command up. If things get bad enough, we bring in the big truck and the big guns and bring in all the senior advisors and everything. And command doesn't change. It just moves to a new location. But now you have a lot more resources at your disposal. This is where we start getting into type 3 incidents, type 2 incidents, something like that. As those incidents wind down, we do just the opposite. The big truck goes away and the IC moves back into their separate vehicle. Things wind down more. IC number 2 goes away, transfers command back to the initial IC or some other new IC that's going to remain on the scene and continue to finish up the work. Usually it's just the final cleanup and picking things up and making sure that everything's there. Sometimes it's the crew that's left while the investigators are there. So we build things up, transferring that command, passing all the appropriate information up the chain. Same thing when we break it down. Another thing we do, remember we talked about size up. We've talked about size up quite a bit, and the fact that it continues throughout the entire incident. We also kind of do a form of size up at the end. I don't know how many of you do this. I'll get a chance to find out next week. AARs, after action reports, or critiques. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the critiques that happen at the fire station 2-3 days later, maybe a week later, and they basically turn into a complaint section. We used to have a really good slide for that, and it showed the people with the baseball bats and throwing things at each other and sitting around the area, everybody mad and arguing. That's not what a critique should be. And I like the term after action report because the way an after action report works, and this should happen someplace on the scene away from all the noise before all the units are released. And what it boils down to, if any of you have been through critical incident stress debriefing, you'll understand this concept because it's almost identical to that. We're going to talk about what happened on the scene. We'll talk about the first arriving crews are going to talk about what they had, what they saw, and what they did. Other crews arriving will briefly say what they did when they got there. Then we'll talk about the things that we could have done better. We're not going to talk about what went wrong. We're just going to talk about the things that we could have done better. And then we try to figure out how to resolve those. Now, that part of the AAR usually is done after the fact, but the first two things we talk about, what mistakes did we make that we could have done better on? There's a lot of times that a good incident commander will actually start that section off by saying, I should have done this differently, and I apologize, but we need to work on this. I need to work on this. I need to make things better. And it actually becomes a supportive thing as opposed to something that's bad. And it really, like I said, if you do it right then, it's fresh in everybody's memory. Everybody knows what's going on because it just happened. So rather than waiting until you get back to the station or waiting until the next shift or a week later or the next training date, get it done and over with. It can be written up by the incident commander that day, that night, the next morning in short order, and we can improve on that and we can keep going from there. So normally this is where we move into the sets and reps. We ask you to give the initial rating report, then give a follow-up report for the incident. Obviously, this is not the best way to do this, so we're not going to belabor it with that. I know some of you that I saw popping up on there are going to be in the classes over the next 3 weeks, so you'll get that practice then. Really, what this class about tonight was all about getting you a basic understanding of how this system works. I am going to provide your folks with, they've recorded this video, so you folks can watch it later, or if you want to just go through the PowerPoint later, I will provide them with the PowerPoint when I get up there. And then you'll have access to just the PowerPoint, and you don't have to listen to me drone on for close to 3 hours. And for those of you who are coming to class, honest, it really, it's a whole lot better than just this. We do a PowerPoint, but we actually get to be interactive. So those coming through the class, I expect you to participate when we ask questions. We want you to give answers. We want you to speak up. We want to hear your side of things, because remember how we talked about, this is not turning you into Phoenix. We don't want you to be like West Bloomfield. I don't want you to be like Heartland. I don't want you to be like any other fire department than the departments you come from. This can be molded to work within your department. Most of these things you'll use. Every once in a while, there's going to be some things you won't. The basics, the stuff I talked about tonight, are the things I'd like to see you start using. Not because they make sense, but because they make your people safer. They give you better accountability. It ensures that most everybody gets to go home. There's always that incident that we can't defend against. There's always going to be something bad that happens. Unfortunately, it's the line of work that we're in. It's the risk that we all know. But this improves the possibility and the probability that most of your people will go home without ever having much of an incident. So again, it's all about safety. Your firefighter safety. The number one job of every fire officer is to take care of their people, make sure their people go home. Keep that in mind. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to meeting a whole bunch of you in the next few weeks. Stay safe, be safe, and I will see you and talk to you all soon. And let me see if I can get rid of this slide.